The Boston Bruins were fuming during and after last night's shootout loss to the Florida Panthers, and rightly so, because that brutal hit to the head on Charlie McAvoy went unpenalized, and that's the kind of thing that cannot continue to happen in this sport.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast, a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Thursday, February 5th, and we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Ian McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team and the NHL for various major outlets for nearly 20 years. On today's episode, we are going to break down the storylines, the stats, and the significance of last night's shootout loss to the Florida Panthers, a game in which former Bruin Brad Marchand scored the shootout winner to give his team the extra point. All of that was largely overshadowed by an incident in the first period where Charlie McAvoy took an elbow to the head, was under-penalized, and the Bruins afterwards were rightfully fuming. We'll talk about that. Break and what may await them afterwards as they continue a push for a playoff spot. But the biggest story last night was the Charlie McAvoy incident. It was kind of the defining moment of last night's game, not just for the season, but also for Team USA and their Olympic hopes. Here's what happened. Midway through the first period, Florida rookie Sandis Vilmanis delivered an open ice hit, more like an elbow, to the head that head coach Marco Sturm labeled as brutal and a clear target of the head. Replays showed Vilmanis leaving his feet, like literally jumping, to deliver an elbow first strike to the left side of Charlie McAvoy's head. Now we know that McAvoy is already playing with a full facial shield due to a broken jaw sustained earlier this season from a errant slap shot. And a hit of this magnitude directly to the head area could have been a worst case scenario for a player already managing facial trauma. McAvoy fell to the ice, was motionless for a few moments, and this caused a visible shift in the game's temperature. McAvoy was helped off the ice by and missed the remainder of the first period for evaluation, likely going through concussion protocol as well as various other tests. To his credit, defenseman Jonathan Aspero, who's been McAvoy's D partner for the last little bit, immediately dropped the gloves to defend McAvoy, but this kind of hurt the Bruins, actually. The officiating crew ended up penalizing Aspero for roughing. After review, they deemed that the Vilmanis elbow to the head was only a 2-minute minor for a hit to the head. And then the Bruins were assessed an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty because of something that was said from the bench to the refs in reaction to this ending up being offsetting minors. So not only did the Bruins watch McAvoy get helped off the ice after a brutal hit to the head, but they also ended up shorthanded because of the Aspero roughing penalty for defending McAvoy, as well as to Marco Sturm on the bench for whatever was said to the refs in light of these decisions. Now, Vilmanis' night was also over at this point. He got the 2-minute minor, but he did not return to the game afterwards. And Florida later officially ruled him out with an upper body injury sustained during the collision. Like, what happened? Did he bruise his elbow on McAvoy's full facial shield, or what happened there? He was not made available to go back onto the ice and basically have to defend himself for what he did there against Charlie McAvoy. Just a complete botched situation there on all levels. I don't know how you can look at that replay and not give that a 5-minute make. Vilmanis had plenty of time to let up, and not only did he not, he actively pushed himself upwards with his elbow out to make direct contact with McAvoy's head. And thank goodness he was wearing that full facial shield, because if that was an elbow to the head just with a normal helmet, who knows what the damage could have been. That full facial shield probably allowed McAvoy to avoid major injury, and in fact, he was able to return to the game, thankfully. The Bruins, this was their last game before the Olympic break, and McAvoy scheduled to fly to Italy immediately after last night's game. He was able to come back to the game to start the second period. He also logged 22 minutes of ice time, despite missing a good chunk of the first period, and nearly won it in a shootout before Sergei Bobrovsky poke-checked his attempt. As of this morning, McAvoy is expected to travel with Team USA, and his return suggests he's cleared the NHL's concussion protocol, though he will likely be under observation by both the Bruins and Olympic medical staff during and after the flight to Milan. This could have been a worst-case scenario for a guy who has had just an absolutely brutal last calendar year. We remember at the Four Nations face-off last year, he had that shoulder injury that he tried to play through, and that eventually developed into an infection that kept him out for the balance of the NHL season and took a real mental toll on him as the Bruins fell down in the standings and he witnessed a bunch of close teammates being traded at the trade deadline last season. And then, of course, this came after the birth of the McAvoy's first child, Reese. So he was kind of not able to really be there as much as he would have liked for his newborn son with all of this going on in and out of the hospital, etc. And then, as we referenced, back in November, he took that puck to the face, full jaw fracture that kept him out for quite a while. That, had some complications as well. There was some health issues with their baby boy as well in the midst of that prompted Rangers head coach Mike Sullivan, McAvoy's father-in-law, to take a leave from his team, even to be there for the family. So for McAvoy to have now missed out on this opportunity for Team USA in Milan would have been pretty devastating for him, especially after such a trash hit that went under-penalized at the very least. Vilmanis left his feet, clearly made McAvoy's head the main point of contact on a late hit. It should be a multi-game suspension. Though maybe his own injury status, quote unquote, will complicate the timing of any hearing, but they definitely have to look into this because it was an egregious hit. I have zero clue how the refs deemed that to be only a minor. The fact that the Bruins came out of that on the penalty kill was just absolutely hilarious and infuriating. The Bruins were able to make a game of it. They were able to erase a third period 2-goal deficit to push the game to overtime and to a shootout where they did eventually lose. We will discuss the stats from last night's game as well as the significance of the loss and where the Bruins stand here at the Olympic break as the podcast continues. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but just wasn't the right fit, you know how important it is to hit with the right candidates fast. And when you want those candidates who truly match what you're looking for, you can trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed is really all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply, but if you're hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. And thank you for helping make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you are a regular listener, the Everydayer Club is built especially for you. If you haven't already, please go check out the details. You get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Boston Bruins, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, every other major podcast app. Even better, you get an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. It'll be an opportunity for us to keep the conversation going over the Olympic break, discuss trade deadline scenarios. We've got mock jerseys going in there from one user after every win for the Bruins. Go to lockedonbruins.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Okay, so apart from the Charlie McAvoy drama last night, the end result for the Bruins was a 5-4 shootout loss to the Florida Panthers. And in the grand scheme of things, you go to Florida, you pick up 2 out of a possible 4 points, losing both games in a shootout without Elias Lindholm and Pavel Zacha in the lineup. That's honestly pretty solid. Like, you're losing your top 2 centers, and you're playing against the best team in the Eastern Conference, as well as the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions. You push it to the brink with shootouts. Yeah, they were up 5-1 in the game against Tampa and probably should have come out with the 2 points there. In this one, they were down 4-2 heading into the third period and had only won one game previously this season after losing or being down heading into the third period, and they were still able to come out with a point. So that's pretty impressive. The potential turning point was the second period, in which the Bruins once again got into some penalty trouble, back-to-back penalties to open the period. Victor Arvidsson hooking, Nikita Zadorov took a slashing penalty at the end of the first, which resulted in a power play goal for the Panthers 30 seconds into the second period. And then Victor Arvidsson hooked Sam Bennett, and that led to a power play goal scored by Matthew Tkachuk to give the Panthers the lead. The Bruins had a power play opportunity late in that period. Actually, they had a string of power play opportunities. The Panthers were called for 4 straight penalties later on in the period. Unfortunately, it resulted in a Anton Lundell shorthanded goal to make it 4-2 heading into the third. The Bruins were able to tie it, eventually cracking through on the power play. They were given 7 power play opportunities last night and went 1-4-7. Usually they are pretty spot on in the power play. Of course, they're playing without Lindholm and Zacha, who are contributors there. Fraser Minton, Casey Middlestat rotating in on the top unit there as the centers. The Bruins had been able to crack through on a couple more power play opportunities. this game would have been theirs. Unfortunately, the Panthers were able to score 2 power play goals on their 3 opportunities and then added a shorthanded goal on one of Boston's power play opportunities, and that was pretty much the difference. Still, the Bruins were able to tie it on a power play goal in the third, thanks to Casey Mittelstadt. Eventually, it went to a shootout, and it was Brad Marchand who got the game winner here in the shootout after Charlie McAvoy had come very close, stymied by a pretty effective poke check there by Sergei Bobrovsky. 5-on-5 last night. The Bruins had the advantage in terms of shot attempts, shots, although Florida did have the advantage in scoring chances and high danger chances at 5-on-5. In all situations, though, even despite having a pretty big advantage in terms of power play time, the Panthers had the majority of the scoring chances, and high danger chances were pretty close. And the expected goals at the end of this one, 5 in favor of the Panthers, 4.5 in favor of the Bruins, and that's pretty much how it shook out last night for both teams here. 29-26, the Bruins led in shots. The difference, of course, was the special teams. Boston going only 1 for 7 on the penalty or on the power play. They should have had a 5-minute power play after that hit on McAvoy. Instead, they were forced to kill a penalty, which is just objectively ridiculous. And that really kind of affected the tenor of the game and kept the Bruins from getting the extra point against the Florida Panthers. The Panthers have now taken both games against the Bruins this season, one left in April, and the Panthers, as we'll see, still well down the standings, but a team like this could awaken at any time, and not getting that extra point for the Bruins could really be detrimental later on. Joonas Korpisalo allowed 4 goals on 26 shots, .846 save percentage, but he made some incredible stops to keep his team in this one and proved why he is worthy of an Olympic spot, albeit in the event of an injury to Buffalo Sabres goaltender Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Mikey Eyssimont led the way for the Bruins in this one with 2 goals in only 12 minutes of ice time. His first 2-goal game of his career. On the back end, Hampus Lindholm led the way with 2 points, 2 assists in a team-high 25 minutes of ice time. Shots advantage went to Eyssimont, who had 4, followed by Fraser Minton, Alex Steeves, Marat Husnudinov, who I thought played excellent last night, especially in overtime, with a fantastic back check on what the commentators believed was going to be a breakaway for the win for the Panthers. Block shots, Andrew Peeke had 3 for the Bruins on the back end, while Kostelic led the way and Tanner Jeannot led the way with 4 hits apiece, while Nikita Zadorov had 5 of his own. Tanner Greer for one, and that really helped to, erase the sting of the McAvoy hit. Love to see Jeannot standing up and getting in there, helping his team, just try to get the upper hand over the Florida Panthers. The Panthers ended a 4-game losing streak in this one. Anton Lundell had a goal and 2 assists. Matthew Tkachuk, Uvis Balinskis with a goal and an assist. Sergei Bobrovsky made 25 saves. Marchand said it's good to get the win. Boston playing very well right now. He thought they had a good game overall. Their penalty kill was on point, obviously. And other notes from this one, Pastrnak was also scheduled to fly to Italy today for the opening ceremony, where he will be the flag bearer for Czechia, which is pretty cool. He said he an honor to be able to hold the flag and represent Czechia at the ceremony. That will happen 2 p.m. on Friday afternoon, so check that out. No pun intended. David Pastrnak will be the flag bearer for his country at the opening ceremonies tomorrow afternoon. That will be very, very cool to see. The men's hockey tournament begins on February 11th. We're going to talk about that extensively throughout the Olympic break. Morgan Geekie had an assist to extend his point streak to 8 games, in which he's had 7 goals, 5 assists, and we, of course, will see today whether or not Sandis Vilmanis will have a hearing for an illegal check to the head on Charlie McAvoy. If he doesn't even have a hearing, that will be an egregious oversight on the part of the NHL. What does this loss mean? Where do the Bruins stand here heading into the Olympic break? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. So the Bruins weren't able to get a win in the last 2 games before the break, unfortunately. They enter the 3-week break in kind of a fascinating, somewhat precarious position. The sting of 2 straight shootout losses in Florida is very real. Has to survive a pretty high-speed sprint to the finish in order to qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs, which is their goal. Make no mistake. This team retooled and continues to retool. A lot of the heavy lifting was last season when they acknowledged that they were out of the playoff race and had to kind of try to get younger, faster, harder to play against. Charlie McAvoy's ability to return from a brutal head hit on Wednesday is more than just kind of medical relief. It's a psychological win for a team built on that kind of scrappy resilience. And his presence is the difference between a playoff run and a collapse. Last season, he was injured at the Four Nations face-off. That loss, coupled with Hampus Lindholm having already been ruled out for the season, made the Bruins' decision to kind of bottom out that much easier. If McAvoy was not able to come back last night, it would have been a big psychological hit for the Bruins. It would have really put their season in doubt as we enter this 3-week break. Of course, it would have been heartbreaking for him to have had to miss the Olympics. He's back, he's healthy, and will continue to be a huge piece for this team moving forward. The Bruins also were playing without Elias Lindholm and Pavel Zacha, who are meant to go to the Olympics as well. We'll see here over the next day or two whether they do travel to join Sweden for Lindholm, Czechia for Zacha. The Bruins did have a next man up mentality that was working for them over the past couple of games. Fraser Minton stepped up to play on the second line. Marat Husnudinov jumped onto the first line. Matt Poitras looked pretty good in a third line role. You will see this morning that he was sent back down to Providence, and that's mostly just to keep him in game play over the break with the Providence Bruins. We'll see if he is coming back. If those two guys are healthy and come back into the lineup after the break, we might not see Poitras for a little bit, but he did not look out of place in his recall, and hopefully he'll be back sooner than later. Now, very few people predicted the Bruins would be in a playoff spot in 2026, and they currently hold the second wildcard spot, 69 points, and just sit 3 points out of second place in a pretty crowded Atlantic division. The Atlantic, top to bottom, well, mostly is so strong right now. You have the Tampa Bay Lightning well out in front with 76 points, followed by the Montreal Canadiens, Detroit Red Wings at 72 points, and then the Buffalo Sabres at 70 points, followed by our Boston Bruins in fifth with 69 points, 6 points up on the Toronto Maple Leafs, and 8 points up on the Florida Panthers and the Ottawa Senators. Those two teams have a .545 point percentage. The Bruins are up at .605, which remains fifth in the Atlantic. Their goal differential, though, is third best, behind only Tampa and Buffalo. So the Bruins are in a decent spot. And if you look over in the Metro, not a very strong group, although you see now the Columbus Blue Jackets are really making a push with 7 wins in a row, and they're 9-1 over their past 10 games. And that's where we see some yellow lights flashing here. The Bruins are 4 points clear of the 9th place Blue Jackets, but Columbus is somehow the NHL's hottest team, riding a 7-game winning streak. They've really been rejuvenated under new head coach Rick Bowness, who has taken over that team, put his imprint on them, and really helped turn their season around. And if there's any post-Olympic rust for the Bruins, and if the Blue Jackets continue to stay hot, that gap could evaporate pretty quickly. Having said that, the Bruins are still ahead of the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New York Islanders. So even if Columbus comes up and jumps over the Bruins in points, that would put them in second place in the Metropolitan Division, and the Bruins would then have to contend with the Penguins for that wild card spot. The Metro not especially strong overall, and it could come down to, whoever falls out of that just falls out of the playoffs altogether and not necessarily into a wild card spot. All that to say, the Bruins face a bit of a dilemma as they approach the trade deadline. The team has earned reinforcement, but with poor 5-on-5 analytics, they remain 28th in expected goals for, although that has improved in 2026. Over investing in rentals for a non-contender could be a long-term mistake. And I discussed yesterday on the podcast, Victor Arvidsson, what do you do with him? He has fit in pretty well with Casey Middlestat and Pavel Zacha. He is a candidate to be traded. The Bruins sent a 5th-round pick in 2027 to the Edmonton Oilers for Arvidsson this past summer. A pending unrestricted free agent, could be a flip candidate, or you could see him as kind of an internal rental that you aren't paying more for to add, but you could be also losing out on the opportunity to get picks or prospects from a legitimate contender. The Bruins showed a reluctance to add a rental in Rasmus Andersson without the guarantee of a contract extension. So I think the goal for this team is to make the playoffs. The goal is to return to contender status. They're not there this season, but with the right moves, the right guys out, the right guys in, they could get there within the next couple of years. And you still have to keep that retool focus and not just looking at this season alone and trying to go all in, because that would be a major mistake. They also need some help on special teams. The power play, even after going 1 for 7, is high end. They're top 5 in the NHL, but the penalty kill is bottom 5. And playoff races, playoff series are often defined by special teams. So this is a glaring red flag, as is their discipline issues. The Bruins lead the league in penalty minutes, rank second in minor penalties taken. They have a couple guys who are league leaders in those categories, in Nikita Zadorov and Mark Kaslik. And the McAvoy incident proved that even when they are the victims, and, across social media, even Bruins haters were acknowledging that that was a bad play, bad call. Emotional reactions like the bench minor on Wednesday that actually put them on the penalty kill after that elbow to the head consistently puts them at a disadvantage. And we saw that in the Stadium Series. We saw that last night. It cannot continue to happen. With 8 roster players and 1 AHLer heading to Italy, the Bruins are one of the most Olympic-heavy rosters. So the risk of injury or burnout for stars like Pastrnak, McAvoy, maybe not so much Swayman because he might not get a ton of gameplay, but the Lindholms with Sweden, Pavel Zacha, Henri Haru on the blue line, although he's been rested because he hasn't played that much. It's all a factor. Jet lag, injury, fatigue, compressed schedule. That is not going to get any easier once they come back and through the month of March. It's a bit of a gauntlet. The Bruins, coincidentally, their first game back, the 26th of February, 3 weeks from today, against those red-hot, hard-charging Columbus Blue Jackets. So that is going to be a must-watch game after the break. The Bruins are for real as a playoff contender, but they are a tier or two below Stanley Cup contender. They've proven they can win scrappy games, but their reliance on high-end finishing, goaltending, are masking some poor puck possession metrics, and their propensity to put themselves behind with penalties, compounded with a poor penalty kill, raises some major concerns about this team. It's going to be fascinating to see how they approach the trade deadline. It's going to be fascinating to see how they come out of the playoff break with so many players going to Italy. We are continuing daily coverage of the Boston Bruins through the Olympic break. We will be keeping tabs on the Bruins players who are over there, obviously talking about the games as they happen, and just breaking it all down every single day here on Locked On Boston Bruins, because that's what we do on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, by the way. Your team every single day. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Please do check out the Locked On NHL Game Night podcast next for league-wide updates. The 24/7 National Locked On podcast YouTube channel as well, getting you ready for the Super Bowl this weekend. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We also have the new Everydayer Club that I would love for you to check out and sign up for. Ad-free episodes of Locked On Boston Bruins, Discord channel access for the hockey group as a whole, as well as for this podcast specifically. We'll keep the conversation going over the Olympic break. And a reminder too, as well, please take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. And we'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, your team every day.